Prologue. I awoke to a world of chaos and darkness. I was on the floor of one of the bio labs along with a case of glass vials full of Res-3 serum. I don't remember falling. As I maneuvered around the fragile vials full of blue anti-aging elixir, I made sure to avoid the ones that had broken and were leaking onto the white tile. While swiping the shards of broken glass off my white lab coat, I held my hand over my eyes to block out the red flashing floodlights emitting from the emergency sirens. The insides of my ears tingled with a static discharge, like the buzzing of 1,000 flapping wings. The muffled echo dulled the words broadcasting over the intercom. What had happened? I knelt to the ground with my fingers pressed firmly against the outer soft tissue of my ears. This managed to erode just enough of the blaring to hear the female robotic voice broadcasting over the SIN, Secure Emergency Network. This is not a drill. There has been a breach in the system stations. Please make your way to the designated evacuation pod for muster with your MO specialist. I repeat, this is not a drill. The automated recall computer's ARC emergency broadcast was on a 2-minute loop. In an unlikely instance of an emergency, the system would automatically upload emergency protocol and issue an evacuation. I guess an emergency was more likely than they thought. My mind was spinning over the words. The system stations were down? What did that even mean? Like off or inoperable? And if they were down, what good would mission ordnance do? I grabbed the nearest operating table and pulled myself to my feet. I felt a surge of pain in my kneecaps as they squished into some of the broken glass. Luckily, it didn't draw blood. I squinted through the flashing red to make out the features of the room. I fumbled through the dark with one hand on the wall, another outstretched before me. The crimson hue was useless. Every few seconds when the siren light would spin, I'd be blinded all over again while my night vision fought to adjust to the pitch black. This was an endless cycle of insanity while I felt my way around the room toward the door. I felt a pressure on the back of my head and thought one of the machines was jabbing me, but as I went to brush it away, my hand made contact with a fleshy substance. My teeth bit down into my lip from the sudden pain. I could taste the bitter iron in my mouth and spit into the darkness. The object pushing on my skull was no object at all, rather the insides of my brain desperately trying to free itself from my skull. My very own parasite clawing its way out of its pancreatic sac. The grapefruit-sized swell protruding from my matted hair felt sticky and moist, and tender, very, very tender and fresh. The moment I was upright, I felt my body somersault sideways as I lost all motor functions. The wave of vertigo sent me spinning to my knees at the nearest waste can. The dark black letters, hazardous materials, blared red when the warning flared overhead. I slowly raised my face from the pile of oral excrement. I wiped the grit from my lips with my sleeve and praised myself for having emptied the bin that morning of any toxic chemicals and materials. My breakfast sat at the bottom of the gray plastic as I gathered my senses. Using one of the nearby walls, I oriented myself with its solidness to fend off the waves of vertigo threatening to send me sprawling on the floor a second time, and etched my way along to the door leading out of the lab. In my blind fumbling, I tripped over something clunky on the floor. I fell into the table and managed to hold on for dear life. I pulled my wobbly feet back under me and peered down at the object that had almost sent me to the floor a third time. My throat heaved and I nearly hurled again. My wrist was over my mouth as I tried to hold back the gagging and the shrilling gasp. 3 seconds later, the floodlights lit up upon the numbers 100 embroidered on the chest of the white shirt he wore. I tried my best to ignore the rotting tissue falling away from his cheekbone and the white pus leaking from both eye sockets. Number 100 had not fared well during trials, nor had the others. Volunteer 100 terminated. We had hoped number 100 would offer more promising results than the first 99 who were administered the serum. In the first 24 hours, the subjects were in a calm state. Vitals were normal and improving. Within 36 hours, the subjects' features had noticeably gained their youthfulness and color. After 52 hours, they were up and moving, full of energy and healthy, a younger version of themselves. Some showed signs of age resistance as significant as 50 years. The serum had worked well beyond what any of us at Biotech had anticipated. The subjects were proof that the ravaging effects of age could be reversed. Then, at 75 hours, Our hopes were dashed as numbers 1 through 23 collapsed. Their bodies spasmed until they stopped moving. Each one had died within the first 2 minutes of the onslaught of the seizures. Numbers 24 through 87 were holding strong, muscles, tissues, tendons, and neuron cells all reactivating and reproducing at exponential rates. At 107 hours, all were laying in puddles of their own blood and erupted excrement. Their eyes had burst, ears leaked a yellow mucus, and their muscles had dislocated completely from the bones or snapped in half. In an attempt to counter the adverse side effects, numbers 88 to 99 were quarantined. All died similar deaths in their solitary confinement chambers. Their vitals had skyrocketed just before plummeting. Within 2 minutes, they went from healthy, fully functional younger images of their former selves to vibrating carcasses castrated on the cold, hard floor, their intestines hanging out of their mouths or eyes, and blood everywhere. The stench reminded me of dying fish. Their lifespan had reached the crevice of 200 hours before relapse and totally bodily shutdown. The bodies of all 99 subjects were wheeled off to the infirmary for incineration. With the serum still in test trials, we couldn't risk it spreading to the rest of the crew and inhabitants on board Proc 1. I had lost all hope of ever mastering resurrecting the Res 3 anti-aging serum until I met number 100. Something within me felt different, as if he was the missing puzzle piece to my impossible genetic code. In my heart of hearts, I knew this was going to work. I had run the calibrations on the serum and made the necessary alterations to the chromosome strands that were believed to be causing the reversal of the anti-aging serum. Instead of returning the test subjects to their youthful states, it sped up their aging until their bodies bled out from overuse. At first, it had worked, but after 24 hours, the outcome was fatal. Each one had rapidly aged and then died as a direct result of increased cell degeneration. Basically, all 99 volunteers had died of old age. So much for the anti-death magic elixir. Number 100 was the last of the willing test subjects to volunteer for the program, and then he died too. His lifeless body at my feet was evidence of that fact. The last I remembered, I had administered the serum 2 weeks ago, and he was in for his daily checkup. All his vitals had looked better than good and holding, and yet he had died too, no less than a few hours earlier. Ark came back over the intercom. Systems machines have failed. Propulsions 1, 3, 7, and 2-1 have failed. Proc 1 has lost all power in the main thrusters. Prepare for impact. I repeat, Proc 1 is going down. What? My body was violently jerked to the side and smashed into the adjacent wall. The dead body of number 100 slid on top of me. His puffy, blank eyes glared down at me. When the floodlights shone again, number 100's features spurred curiosity within me. There were no visible signs of death. His eyes hadn't burst, his ears weren't bleeding, and there was no evidence he had had a seizure. With his body laying on my abdomen, I squeezed my hand out from under him and felt for a pulse. I waited for 10 seconds, hopeful. Ark made me jump as her static voice blared through the intercom. All stations must evacuate to their designated areas immediately. Systems are critical. Make your way. Ark went out in a gurgle of static. I felt Proc 1 rattle beneath me as the engine strained against the weight of the ship. With power lost to the propulsion tubes, there was no way the backup generators could compensate for that amount of wattage. We were going down. Number 100 shot to the ceiling with a sudden jerk. My body soon followed suit. I felt weightless for a few seconds as my body hung in midair. All the broken glass from the vials floated in the air all around me like sharp bubbles. Something about number 100 caught my attention. Had he blinked? I was staring intently, and I felt the tug on my body as I smashed back into the floor before the sound of the explosion ever made it to my ears. Number 100's body crashed beside mine, and our eyes were face to face. Just before I lost consciousness, I saw his left eye twitch and look at me. He was alive.